responsible for any content, information, or opinions expressed. User bears full responsibility for their reliance on such content, information, or opinions.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Caregiver Solution Info Show. I'm your host, Marcia Teele, and I'm happy that you could join us this evening. This show is particularly important for family non-paid caregivers who are caring for someone that has some form of dementia, and that person is really vulnerable, right? They're both vulnerable. The person that has the dementia is vulnerable. The person caring for the person with dementia is vulnerable. We talk a lot about caregiving here on this program for the last 7.5 years. Anything related to caregiving, what you need to know, what you need to do, some tips along the way, as well as specifics about the disease. And it could be Alzheimer's, it could be Parkinson's, it could be a vascular dementia. It doesn't matter what form that the memory loss takes, it's still memory loss, it's still a dementia, and you're still being a caregiver. These are things that are really hard for a lot of families to understand, and a lot of information is needed in order to do the best that you can to understand what's happening, why this is happening, where it's going. Now, last week, I had a representative from the Alzheimer's Association of the Southeast Florida chapter with me here in the studio, and we talked about the basics. We talked about what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. We talked about some of the stages of dementia, of Alzheimer's, and what it looks like and what the person can exhibit, the changes that happen in that person's behavior. We talked about some resources that the Alzheimer's Association can provide to you if you are a caregiver, and the association has over 50 or 60 different chapters throughout the United States. So those are very, very important to know, especially if you're a new caregiver. Now, it's a new year, and so we wanted to start off with the basics and let everybody know that there is help out there, there's hope out there. But today we're going to go a step further. If you're a caregiver and you've been caring for someone for a while, you know what you've been through. Your journey is the same but yet different of any other caregiver, meaning that no one can walk exactly in your shoes. But the fact that you're a caregiver, you go through so many similar situations. And so caregivers are great for helping other caregivers. And this show is particularly for all caregivers, whether you're a brand new type of caregiver or if you've been caregiving for quite some time. So today we're going to go a little further, and we're going to talk about what happens when it's time for your loved one to leave the home where you've been caring for them because either you're stressed out, they need more care, lots of reasons that could happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to talk about what happens if you wait too long, a crisis situation, what that might look like, and how to prevent that. And so I'm very happy today to have my guest host on. She's on the phone. She's calling in from Fort Myers, where her home office is. Her name is Teele Cunningham. And Teele is there's her picture. If you're watching us on caregiversolutions.info show, you can see her lovely face up on the screen. If you are listening on iHeartRadio or one of our local Southeast Florida radio stations, you can't see her, but I will tell you about her. She's a certified dementia practitioner, and she's also a senior memory care advisor with ProMedica's Arden Courts Memory Care Community of Fort Myers, Florida. So she's joining me via audio today, and I want to welcome her to the show. Teele, hello.
Hello, Marcia. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you for being available to join us today and talk about this important topic. I know you've been in the field doing this for a very long time, and you've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of families throughout your career. And this is so important because, you know, caregiving is a learning process. We don't go to school for it. We don't learn about it growing up unless we happen to have it in our family. And as people age, and age is probably the most common denominator as far as a risk factor for people getting some type of dementia. The older we get, the more vulnerable we are. We talked about vulnerability a moment ago. And so it's important to let everybody know the big picture. And it is a journey, and it's one step at a time, but I think in reality we have to know where we're going and what the end is so that we can be prepared for it. So that's why I'm glad you're here, so we can talk a little bit more about what that journey is going to look like. So thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Marcia. I'm so glad to be able to share information with you and all the other caregivers that are out there this evening.
So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is crisis. Now, a lot of families take care of their loved one in the home. The next step is usually getting some home health into the home to help out, a little respite care here and there, someone to come in as a companion, to take them places, or a home health aide to give them showers. Then the next step, could be maybe going to an adult day center. And then eventually there comes a point in time where that just isn't working any longer. Teele, why don't you describe a typical home setting where a caregiver has been taking care of, say, a spouse for a very long time, and she's doing her best, and she's there, day in and day out, and she does have a little bit of help at home. But how can things change, and what might happen in that scenario that would maybe cause her to consider getting more help from professionals in maybe an assisted living community?
Absolutely. So when it comes to that point, Marcia, there's several different denominators that the caregiver can notice that it's come to that time. It's now the stress has exasperated. It has become a burden now to be a caregiver. They notice that there's changes in behavior. The person living with the disorder, they might become irritated, anxious. They might start having hallucinations depending upon their form of dementia. They're also noticing a change in mobility, a change in continence, a change in being able to feed themselves. So they look at this as everything is moving forward, it's moving forward fast, and that's when they go into crisis mode, that they need to do something immediately, that they need to put together a quick plan and make it a quick transition for their loved one, when in reality, this plan should have been put in place right from the first part of receiving that diagnosis that their loved one has one of the forms of dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's very important to have a plan, like you said, and sometimes things will actually create a need and the plan's not going to work anymore, because as best as we can plan for the future, the disease really dictates what happens next. And things can change on a dime. Literally overnight, there could be changes. And one of the things that will necessitate a major change in the plan would be if someone fell. And you mentioned change in mobility. Describe what happens if someone's at home and they have a bad fall. What would happen in that scenario to that person as far as their care and their care plan and next steps? If someone were to, have a pretty bad fall at home, what would happen to them at that point?
Certainly. So if they had a bad fall at home, the first thing that the caregiver needs to do is call 911 and have EMS come to the home. At that point, they're taken to the hospital. They would probably do an x-ray. They're going to check them out. They might be admitted to the hospital, or the hospital may say, we're going to send them home. But that first fall is exactly that. It's the first of several falls to come. Now, if they keep them in the hospital, they may end up going to rehab, but that's a short-term solution where they may be able to get some physical therapy, some occupational therapy, something to help them. In some cases, Marcia, they're going to need surgery. They might have fractured their hip or their knee. Something could have happened. So their mobility has changed drastically from where they were before. If they were using a walker, there's a good chance they could now be using a wheelchair. If they were walking with a cane before, they might now need a walker. And with that change, that also causes more confusion for their loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia. It also causes more anxiety, agitation, because they're in a state where they don't know what they can do and they don't know what to do next. So this puts more pressure on the caregiver. And once they're in the hospital, the hospital can say to them in a matter of right from the emergency room, nothing we can do at this point. They may say we don't recommend surgery, so we're going to send them home. And now the caregiver has that burden of, okay, now my loved one who was using a walker needs a wheelchair. How am I going to transfer them? How am I going to assist them to ambulate? As well as all these new behaviors that could come from that as well.
Right, and sometimes they're not prepared for that walker or that wheelchair because of the living situation. Maybe the environment is not conducive to having a wheelchair or a walker to accommodate that person because, again, nobody really planned for that. Maybe they live in a very older type of home where the building code did not accommodate persons with disabilities, so the width of the doorway is not the standard, what we know now, of 36 inches to accommodate that wheelchair. And you can't even get a wheelchair in the bathroom in some of these places, especially in some older condos or some mobile homes even. And so then that becomes even more difficult for a caregiver because bringing somebody back that you're not prepared and how to handle that. So it just sometimes creates problem after problem after problem. And that's what we want to try to avoid. So Teele, when someone is at the hospital and they do go to rehab, a lot of families are kind of blindsided sometimes after the person has their rehab because all of a sudden they might get a call from the rehab that says, okay, in 2 days, your loved one's being discharged. Where's he going to go? Talk a little bit about that and why that happens.
Absolutely. And it happens every single day, Marcia. As you and I both know, we get those frantic calls from the caregiver saying, I just had a care plan meeting with the discharge planner at my husband's rehab, and they're discharging him tomorrow afternoon, and they told me I have to find a place. And this person is not prepared. They're not prepared for what needs to happen, because it's not just a matter of moving someone from that clinical rehab center into a memory care community. It's a matter of preparing that person for that move, to try and set up a smooth transition. And you don't have the time to make sure that everything is going to go as seemingly as possible. So one of the things that I always say to the families is, what exactly are they saying, is happening with your loved one? If they're saying, where are you going to send him? That's the first indicator that your loved one really can't go home. And many times we're finding more and more of the social workers and the discharge planners saying, your loved one needs to go to memory care. Your loved one needs more care than you can provide at home. And I don't think that people really realize what the cost of having caregivers come in to their home, because they think, well, I'll take them home and I'll get a private duty to come in. And that range right now, what we're seeing for private duty caregivers, is about $35 to $45 an hour. So they need to have them in their home if that's the route that they're going to go, and that's very, very expensive. We're talking about $18,000 to $25,000 a month, depending upon the agency that they're utilizing. But they're also getting hit with this, you need to find a place. So they're stressed, they're not knowing the right questions to ask, they don't understand what needs to happen to make that move forward. They don't understand that they need to have copies of all their legal documents in place, the insurance cards. And I think the most important thing that they don't understand is that Medicare and their supplemental insurances is not going to pay for memory care. Memory care is private pay. If they're receiving VA aid and attendance, it can go towards that. And eventually down the road, perhaps get the Medicaid waiver, which only pays a small portion of it. But I think when you put all those factors together, the stress that they have of making a decision in 24 hours for their loved one just weighs on the caregiver.
So many questions, so many issues to deal with. It's overwhelming for caregivers. And again, they had a plan, or maybe they didn't, but sometimes plans can go awry because other things happen. And in this case was a perfect example. And so now they're scrambling to try to figure out where this person's going to go, because maybe they have not even thought about looking around to see, just in case, where they might need to utilize in a situation like this. And that is one of the really good reasons for people not to delay just checking out places. I've talked to many, many caregivers and said, well, why don't you take a tour? Well, you know what, I don't need to do that yet. We're far off from that, and I'll do that eventually. And, they kind of keep postponing it, but there are ramifications and there are consequences to postponing your plan of care. And I know that you have seen this time and time again, as well as I have. So we always want to encourage the families and the caregivers to be proactive rather than reactive. What do you say about that?
Absolutely, Marcia. It's funny, when you were talking, I immediately thought of, here in Fort Myers, when we went through the hurricane and everything that went along with that. I actually was working with a wife about 2 years before that about coming in for a tour. She was the caregiver for her husband, but she kept saying, well, things aren't so bad yet. He still knows who I am. And, he likes to do things around the house. And I really want to keep him home for as long as possible. Well, when Hurricane Ian came slamming into Lee County, into Fort Myers and Cape Coral, she didn't know what to do because she had to evacuate. And all of a sudden, with this trauma of the hurricane, all these behaviors were coming from her husband. A lot of anxiety. He was very upset. He was pacing. He was trying to wander out of the house, which, according to her, was not something he was doing before. She didn't know what to do. And in that 2 years, I was consistently calling her, inviting her to things. She and her husband came to a couple of different events. They attended one of the events that we had at a church with guest panelists to help them through the process, but she failed to put a plan together. So as she is evacuating from her home, driving to a friend's house with her husband, she's trying to reach me saying, I need him to come into your building. We need him to come in for now. And when this all settles down, then he can come home. And, you know, I mean, everybody was evacuating. So I had a conversation with her. She was with the friend. Our building ended up evacuating as well. But once we were able to get our residents back in, which was quite quick in comparison to many other communities, I was able to call her and we were able to get her husband placed in. And she said, well, I don't want this to be permanent. He's not doing that bad. And after we went through everything with her and we reviewed the stages of the disease, he was late stage 5 going into stage 6. And after we educated her more, she realized that it was her guilt that was holding her back to move forward. But now, here her husband has a very active social life, getting the care that he needs, and she can now be his wife and not that hands-on caregiver. And she also was able to bring out a lot of things that she was masking about the disease with her husband. When I would talk to her and say, well, are you noticing any incontinence issues? Oh, he's had a couple of accidents, but nothing bad. Well, a couple of accidents still leads to incontinence concerns. Has there been a fall? Well, you know, it's the rug. I've got to remove the rug. So she had an excuse for everything. She was masking the disease, answering for him, taking care of everything for him, and basically it was detrimental to him and to what he was experiencing with the disease. And then the hurricane came, the trauma came, and it exasperated everything. So there's one person who did not want to take tours, did not feel things were that bad, and just wanted to kind of, hopefully, if she waited long enough, maybe everything would stay on the baseline where he was at, where, Marcia, you and I both know that baseline can change day to day.
It's a combination of guilt, denial, maybe throw a little fear in there, you know, for the caregiver. And so many times I've heard the spouse say, well, he's not ready or she's not ready, when if you think about it and you think about asking those type of questions that you just described, it's really the well spouse that's really not the one that's ready, because the patient certainly is ready in most cases and would benefit from all the services and programs available. And it's that guilt and that denial and the fear of maybe being alone or whatever the reason is of that well spouse that they say they're not ready, but it really does reflect back on that well spouse. So that's a great story to illustrate, Chalet, the actual circumstances and the actual reality of the situation, because that happens all the time.
It certainly does, Marcia, more often than not. And it's really quite sad because there's so many resources out there for the families to become educated and to know how to start to put that plan together and to go into our communities and know what questions to ask and to find out exactly what the care is that their loved one's going to be receiving at a community and how that differs from having a private duty caregiver come into your home 6, 8, 10 hours a day, as well as the cost differential of it.
That's right, that's right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to thank our national sponsor for this program, and when we come back, Chalet will be back with us, and we're going to talk about what's the difference between a memory care assisted living and a memory care nursing home. That's a question we get a lot, and we're going to answer that in just a moment, so stay with us.
Arden Court's memory care community has the expertise and experience to simplify and enhance your loved one's life and to protect you, finding the peace of mind you deserve. Come, see the difference in a facility like Arden Courts that is 100% dedicated to Alzheimer's and dementia care can have on your loved one. Call us at 888-478-2410 or visit our website, arden-courts.com. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
At this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor. That is Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts has over 50 memory care assisted livings throughout the United States, part of the ProMedica family. And Arden Courts is a leader in the field of memory care for residents, but they also are there for you, the family caregiver. They want to help you, they want to educate you, they want to hold your hand, literally and figuratively. And so because you are listening or watching this program, they have a wonderful resource for you, and it's absolutely free. This is the Untangling Alzheimer's book. It was written by Dr. Tam Cummings. It's an excellent resource for family caregivers to learn about different situations that come up, a lot of definitions, a lot of tips, a lot of challenges that are explained with solutions inside this book. And so if you're a family caregiver and you want to learn more about caregiving and about dementia, this book is for you. And all you have to do to get it is just to send your name, address, and telephone number, send an email, tell them that you heard about the free offer on the Caregiver Solution Info Show, and they'll be happy to mail a book to you. That email address is delray@arden-courts.com. Again, Delray, D-E-L-R-A-Y, at Arden, A-R-D-E-N, -courts, C-O-U-R-T-S.com. Get this book because I highly recommend it, and you'll be really happy to have it as a resource on your shelf to be prepared for what's coming next. So again, Untangling Alzheimer's, Dr. Tam Cummings, it's a great book. So send your email as soon as possible. So today I'm talking to Teele Cunningham. Teele is a senior memory care advisor with the ProMedica Arden Courts in the Fort Myers area. And Teele is also a certified dementia practitioner, which she has been doing, helping families and doing educational spots and programs and classes for not only caregivers but also for many professionals who need to learn more about what caregiving and dementia involves. So thank you, Teele, for joining me via audio, and I'm happy that you're here. We want to continue our conversation. We've already talked about what happens when a crisis comes and how to prevent a crisis by making a plan, working that plan, and at least having it in your back pocket in case you do need to pull it out and go with it as opposed to being unprepared. Because if you are unprepared, you might be surprised that you're not going to be able to get what you want if you had been prepared and had time to make your own decisions. So that being said, Teele, let's say that a family did prepare, they had a plan, they hopefully picked Arden Courts, but if for some reason they live in a location where there is no Arden Court memory care, they picked another place, what can a family expect next? How does it go from a person being at home or maybe being in a hospital or rehab and then making that move to the memory care. Can you walk us through, like, step by step, like what that would look like?
Certainly, Marcia, I'd be happy to. So when a family has made that decision, I know with Arden Courts, one of the first things we do is to get them on our wait list. And that is by having them complete some of the forms. And there's quite a bit of forms. We call it our family homework that the caregiver, their loved ones, need to complete. And it's not just clinical paperwork or financial paperwork. It is also a biography that is so important to get as much detail as possible so that a smooth transition plan can be put together. So when we meet with the family and we're going through the paperwork, they complete that paperwork. And then in the state of Florida, there is a form that needs to be completed by their physician. This form is called an 1823 form. It's 3 pages long, and the physician needs to complete it as well as to provide a medication list, sign off on the medication list, and then that form needs to come to the community. Once all those forms are put together, the community can put together a clinical plan as well as a socialization plan for their loved one to come into the community. But let's just say that someone says, okay, I'm ready to do it. I want to make the move next week. What's my next step? So we have to put together, how are we going to get the loved one to come to the community? What are we going to say to the loved one? How are we going to explain that they're coming from home into an unfamiliar environment? If there's time, sometimes we can have them come and spend a day with us doing some activities and having a meal with us. Or if there's an event that we're having, the family can bring the loved one to the event. But in many cases, what's happening, and I know you know this as much as I do, Marcia, they make the decision, but it needs to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. And that's fine. At Arden Courts, we do move-ins 24/7. But we don't have the opportunity with these crisis emergency move-ins to make sure that that transition plan is going to be as smooth as possible, not only for their loved one, but for the family. Because we're actually helping everyone transition. And it's making sure that everything is in place. They need to make sure they have a copy of their power of attorney paperwork, their living will, copies of insurance cards, any type of government photo ID. And it's making sure that everything is in place. Now, in our communities, in Arden Court communities, the rooms come furnished and decorated for their loved one to move right in. So the family doesn't have to worry about running out and buying furniture or bedding or towels or any type of linen. We provide them a list of how much clothing to bring. If their loved one's incontinent, how much incontinence products to bring, the medications, as well as personal items like photos or, an item of some type of knickknack or something that means a lot to them to have in the room for them. So we put all of that together, and then once we have everything, their loved one can move in. And it's putting all those pieces in place that really helps to put that whole puzzle together to make that move. Many times we'll say to the family, it's up to the family. They can visit as often as they want, as soon as they want, but it really is best if we have a couple of days to be able to help them transition and get used to the caregivers assisting them with their activities of daily living, for the nurses to give them their medication, as well as for them to have that social setting of our restaurant-style dining for them to eat together with a group of people, with their peers who are in the same situation that they're in. So we put all of those pieces together and put together the transition plan.
So it sounds like a lot, but because you're working with people that know the business, they know what they're doing, they have the experience, they understand, it can be easier than what maybe a family member would think, but not always. There are things that can go topsy-turvy, but I think that a lot of times families get scared about the process, and it can go very smooth, and I think a lot of times they're very surprised, wow, that was easier than I thought it was. And of course that makes everybody happy when the resident comes in and they're happy to meet new people and happy they can join in activities. And a lot of times families are like, well, I never thought it would be like this, so easy, and that he would take to it so well. So I think a lot of times people's misconceptions, or sometimes their fear of what might happen, prevents them from maybe making that decision. And I always say, you don't know until you give your loved one an opportunity. And it's really about giving them an opportunity to see what they can do, because nobody can tell you. And it's best for them, it's best for you, and they are very, very surprised. And so thank you for walking us through what a typical day would like with, bringing in a new person into the community and how that would work. Because I think it's important for people to understand that, it can be a good experience, and it could be something that is going to be greatly beneficial to the family as well as to the new resident. Which is a wonderful thing. And you and I have both seen such wonderful outcomes of people moving into a community and having such a better quality of life. And that's what it's all about, is the improvement in their quality of life. So that leads me to the next question, Teele. I'd like for you to explain to everyone, what is the difference between a memory care assisted living and a memory care skilled nursing facility / nursing home? And the reason I'm wanting to bring this up is because a lot of people hear that word, like you said, from the hospital, from the discharge planner, from somebody, your loved one needs memory care. And a lot of people think that memory care is different depending upon what that person needs. And it could be memory care at a higher level and memory care at a more independent level. So can you explain the difference and why one would be more appropriate than the other for a particular person?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, Marcia. So when people think of memory care, many times their mindset automatically goes to a nursing home or old folks home or the skilled nursing home. Memory care, assisted living memory care, is a home-like setting. It is not skilled nursing. And I think that people really need to visit a skilled nursing center and then a true memory care community to see the differences. And to be honest with you, Marcia, I think you and I can both agree on this. Like in Lee County, there are 18 skilled nursing and rehab. Out of those 18 skilled nursing and rehab, only 5 of them have dedicated wings or dedicated areas that are secure, that are meant for people with Alzheimer's and the various forms of dementia. And then they have staff that specializes in caring for those people in that section. Those other 13 skilled nursing homes as well rehab centers in Lee County do not have a dedicated area. Now that doesn't mean they wouldn't take someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, but if the person who's coming to them is a wander risk or has behaviors that they just don't know how to handle, or has a situation where they have more than one form of the disease, they may not be able to accept them. And it's getting harder and harder to find available beds in skilled nursing. In a memory care community, you have a home-like setting. There is a clinical aspect to it, but the socialization aspect is just as important. So there's community centers, there's studios, there's areas where they can walk outside and wander. At Arden Courts, we have a 1/4-mile walking trail with gazebos, tables and chairs, shaded areas, a butterfly garden, freestanding beds where they can actually garden and do things. And what I love to say about our residents in Fort Myers, everyone has a job. So no matter what their mobility is, we're still preserving their dignity, and we're allowing them to be as independent as possible with the guidance and the expertise of our caregivers. If a person, and this is where it gets very difficult too, because they're at the hospital and the hospital is saying to them, for example, your loved one needs to go into memory care, but their loved one is bedbound, or their loved one needs a 3-person transfer or a Hoya lift, or they have a feeding tube, or they have behaviors that are detrimental to themselves or to others that they cannot get under control, or they need a total med reset, they may not be eligible to go into assisted living memory care. And in assisted living memory care, we have to remember there's 2 different licensures. So there's the standard license, and it's exactly what it says, it's standard services. And then there's an LNS licensure, which is limited nursing services. So if their loved one also needs oxygen, diabetic care, they need eye drops put in their eyes, they need wound care, cast care, colostomy care, braces, anything like that, if the community has an LNS license, and if they provide LNS services, then they can go into assisted living memory care, but it needs to be an LNS licensed community. And that also means that they have a nurse in the community 24/7. At Arden Courts, we have a nurse available 24/7, and only our nurses give the medication. So there is a big difference, and I truly highly encourage all family members, caregivers, know the difference between the two. Understand that skilled nursing is exactly that. It is a skilled nursing center. It's very clinical. It is not going to be the same setting, the same design, the same concept as an assisted living memory care community. And there's different assisted living memory care communities. There's freestanding memory care, and then there is assisted living that has perhaps a wing or an area, which, you know, is basically just an offshoot of their assisted living, where they have some rooms available, some beds available for people that have Alzheimer's and dementia, but they may not be able to handle all stages of the disease.
Well, thank you for that great explanation. You know, I always tell families, I said, living in a memory care community, a memory care assisted living community, is more like living at your own home, whereas living in a memory care nursing home is like living in a hospital. And nobody wants to live in a hospital. And I think you kind of get the picture there. One is, like you said, clinical, it's a hospital-like setting, and the other one is more like home. So, you know, it's kind of easy which one you would want, but not necessarily what you can have depending upon the actual condition of that person. So we're going to take a quick break and come back and finish up with Shalay Cunningham and talking about what you need to know when you're planning a move with your loved one into a setting, whether it be memory care, whether it be a different type of setting. But this is all things that you need to know. It's all good stuff. So we'll be right back on this quick commercial, so stay tuned.
Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back, and my guest today is Teele Cunningham. She is a memory care advisor. She is a certified dementia practitioner, and we're talking about what you need to know about nursing homes with memory care, assisted livings with memory care, and which one would be most appropriate for your loved one. Now, Teele, during your conversation, you mentioned a lot of different things that would necessitate someone going into one type of community versus another, a facility versus a community, and there's a long string of things. But in general, people might be thinking, well, how do I know? Because I don't know all the ins and outs and the rules. So explain about how an assessment is done, and then explain some of the top major reasons why someone would not be appropriate to move into a memory care community where they would be possibly denied because they would need a memory skilled in that type of scenario, because we do get that a lot. And sometimes it's because a person waits too long to make their plan, and sometimes the person who has the memory loss just declines so fast that you just don't even have a chance to go to your first choice. But what happens in that case, and how is an assessment determined?
That's so true, Marcia. And how an assessment is done is that, for example, myself, the executive director or director of nursing, known as our resident services coordinator, would set up a time where we would go and assess the individual. And our assessment is, when we do it, it's not like we have a clipboard and we're asking them who the president is or doing mini mentals. It is checking things out in a clinical aspect, reviewing medications, looking at notes, finding out what this person has been doing, what has changed in their behaviors, what has changed in their mobility. And, we can do an assessment in their home. If they're in the hospital, we do an assessment in the hospital or the rehab center. Even if someone's going to adult daycare, I've done many assessments while someone was at adult daycare, and I was able to observe them. And it's a big part is observing them. What is their mobility like? What are what skills do they have still that they're capable of doing? Because someone cannot cut their food does not mean they cannot go to assisted living memory care. If they, because they need assistance taking their medication, that doesn't mean they can't go. As I stated, there's a few reasons why someone would not be able to go into memory care. So when we go in and do the assessment, the first thing we're going to do is to check for wounds. If a person has a stage 2 or higher wound, that wound needs to be treated, and they're not able to go into any assisted living at that point. If they are more for Arden Courts, a 2-person assist where they can stand and pivot with that assistance, they're not going to be able to come to memory care. If they are considered bedbound, they cannot go into assisted living memory care. If they have a feeding tube, they cannot go into assisted living memory care. If they are still on IV antibiotics or IV medications, they cannot go into an assisted living memory care. If they have behaviors that are detrimental to themselves or to others, first of all, we want to get to the root of why are they having that behavior. Did they have a bad reaction to medication? At Arden Courts, we dig deeper when we're doing our assessment. So we look at that factor. This person may just need some rehab or a medication reset, and then once that is accomplished, they may be able to come to Arden Courts, Fort Myers, or to any of the Arden Courts into an assisted living memory care. If they need a Hoya lift to be able to ambulate, to transfer, they cannot go into any assisted living memory care. So those are just some of the reasons. And we have to look at the person as a whole. Where are they in the disease process? It was very sad, but recently I had to do an assessment of someone who was at a rehab center. And I spoke to the family. We went over everything on the phone, got a lot of information. I met the family at the rehab center. And once I got there, I'm talking to their loved one who, was like stage 6 of the disease. So wasn't really quite sure of who the family members were, had a hard time getting their words together, and that was still fine. But when I tried to see this person transfer, even with 2 people assisting them, it was like this person was boneless. And someone's going to get hurt, either that person or the caregivers. So that person still needed to be in skilled nursing.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That happens, every day where we have to make those decisions, but it's based upon, the rules of the state. And everything that Teele was talking about today, of course, is through the state of Florida, the rules, regulations. Medicare is the same throughout the country, but Medicaid is different state to state. So I know she mentioned a little bit of something about Medicaid, and that would be different in whatever particular state that you are in, if it's not Florida. And so you have to, look at those rules and the regulations in your state. But overall, the information was so helpful, Teele, and I want to thank you for being here today. As a matter of fact, I was thinking, Teele, you and I have been doing this for over 20 years. We've always been on the same page. We could talk for hours in a day about these topics because we've lived them, we know them so well, working in memory care for over 20 years. And I've been doing the Caregiver Solution Info Show for the last 7.5 years. And I think that I would like to invite you to join me as a co-host and be on the show and interview some new guests and help out with this, because I think that it would be a great partnership to have you, and we could do even more together. Would you be willing to do that with me?
Oh my gosh, Marcia, thank you so much. Absolutely. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and what we can do for the caregivers together as a team is, I feel, would just be amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for all of your knowledge, your expertise, for all of your help every day in the communities and with all the people that you serve. And this is just another way that we serve. We're giving resources out there to people that can listen on the radio, watch from their home, get that extra level of resource in their hands, in their ear, whatever they need to help them along the journey of caregiving. So thank you, Teele. I'll look forward to working with you more in the future. Thank you, audience, for listening or watching to us today. I'm so happy that you've joined us. We're here every Tuesday. Our new time for 2023 is 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And so set your clocks and set your calendars for that. And don't forget to get the book, the free book, The Untangling Alzheimer's by Dr. Tam Cummings, and sign up for that and send an email to delray@arden-courts.com. And we will see you again next week with more information from the Caregiver Solution Info Show. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Good night.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The content, information, and opinions expressed during the related show are those of the show personalities